Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty intense. We've got our hands on a major strategic intelligence brief.
Right.
And this document, it lays out the global state of play at the close of 2025. It's not just what happened, it's about the fundamental forces reordering things.
It really is the ultimate shortcut. Our mission for you really is to distill this down.
To find the key nuggets.
Exactly. To cut through all the noise and get to the core forces that are, reshaping everything from new U.S. policy to, well, the rise of agentic AI.
And the big takeaway right at the top is it's striking. The briefing says 2025 saw the most dramatic recalibration of American foreign policy since the immediate post-Cold War era.
A massive turning point, and that's all crystallized in the National Security Strategy, the NSS, which was formalized just last month, December 4th.
Okay, and what's the thinking behind it?
It's underpinned by two key doctrines. The brief calls them civilizational realism and hard sovereignty.
Hard sovereignty. What does that mean in practice?
You think of it as the formal doctrine of putting the physical protection of the homeland and its immediate region first. Full stop.
So this is way more than just a rhetorical shift.
Oh, far from it.
Yeah?
It's a historic structural move away from focusing on, say, great power competition with Russia and China in places like Europe or the South China Sea.
And toward what?
Toward domestic stability and regional missions. It is an explicit pivot, inward and hemispheric.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This America's pivot. The source material is, well, it's pretty clear. It says the Western Hemisphere is now the #1 priority. The explicit goal is restoring American preeminence there.
And the way they're pursuing that goal is incredibly assertive. The brief actually gives it a name. It calls it the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine.
Wow, okay. The Trump corollary. That's a loaded term. So for anyone listening, the original Monroe Doctrine was what, 19th century?
Right, basically telling European powers to stay out of the Americas.
So what does this new corollary add to that?
It completely reframes the threat. It's not about external powers anymore. It's about, internal instability. It views large-scale migration and regional conflict as direct threats.
Threats that have to be met with force.
Direct military and economic force. The danger is now seen as coming from inside the hemisphere.
And this isn't theoretical. The brief mentions specific actions already happening.
It does. Targeted military strikes on alleged drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific. And it says the administration is openly weighing military action in Venezuela.
And what's really radical, according to the source, is the thinking behind it. It says migration has been elevated to the paramount national security threat.
Exactly. Viewing demographic change through this civilizational lens, that affects everything. Budgets, intelligence, how fast the military responds. All of it.
So to make all this work, you need a serious economic engine behind it. What's the plan for funding this Fortress America?
It boils down to what they're calling the 3-3-3 plan. Target 3% GDP growth, a 3% deficit, and produce an extra 3 million barrels of oil per day. It's an aggressive, deregulatory framework built on energy dominance.
And the defense budget reflects that.
Perfectly. A massive $1.1 trillion, but it's focused squarely on maritime dominance and continental defense, not on major overseas deployments.
Which you can see playing out right now with this drug war 2.0 in Latin America. The key move seems to be designating major cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
FTOs.
That's the legal lever. Designating them as FTOs allows for cross-border kinetic operations. Basically military strikes justified as counterterrorism.
And there's a carrot to go with that stick.
A very big carrot. The policy is to reward and encourage governments that align with this. The brief points directly to the $40 billion bailout for Argentina under President Milei. That's a huge tool of influence.
So if all this energy and money is pouring into the Americas, where is it being drained from? I'm guessing the brief points straight to the Middle East. It does, and the language is incredibly blunt. It declares the end of the region's dominance over U.S. foreign policy.
And we're seeing that in action.
Absolutely. You had the intense strikes on Iranian nuclear sites back in June, but the official line in the NSS is that Iran has been greatly weakened, and the U.S. can now afford to pull back its political focus.
The really interesting part here is watching who fills that power vacuum. The Sharm el-Sheikh summit in October.
Right, the one that produced the Gaza peace declaration.
Saudi Arabia was notably excluded from the top-level talks.
That's the key insight. The U.S. pullback is creating a new dynamic. And it's Turkey and Qatar that are now dominating regional mediation, especially on Gaza. It's a major realignment of influence away from Riyadh.
So moving across the globe, this American pivot creates immediate and intense problems for Europe.
A dual challenge, really.
On one hand, they have to respond to U.S. demands for more burden sharing.
But at the same time, they're navigating these extraordinary criticisms in the NSS about facing civilizational erasure.
Yeah.
It's a very harsh wake-up call.
And it seems to have worked. The numbers here are they're staggering. The brief points to a historic commitment from the NATO summit in June.
Yes, an agreement to spend 5% of annual GDP on defense by 2035.
5%. That seems almost unbelievable considering the struggle to even hit the 2% target. Is this being treated as a serious commitment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The source treats it as a cemented plan. It's broken down, too. 3.5% for core defense and 1.5% for defense-related infrastructure, hardening bases, improving logistics, that sort of thing.
And the money is already flowing.
It is. EU defense spending hit 343 billion euros in 2024. Poland is already at nearly 3.8% of GDP. And maybe the most telling stat, Norway has now surpassed the U.S. in defense spending per capita.
Per capita, wow, that really underscores the shift. But internally, Europe is also dealing with this rightward ratchet, right,
Yeah.
which challenges EU norms.
Exactly. Even as countries like Poland and France are pushing for what they call European sovereignty, trying to build up their own industrial and defense power, separate from the U.S.
Hedging their bets.
Hedging their bets against a potentially more isolationist Washington.
Okay, so let's go across the Pacific. China seems to be navigating this with a pretty sophisticated strategy.
Economic insulation and export resilience. Goldman Sachs actually upgraded their 2025 GDP growth forecast to 5.0%, which shows remarkable agility.
How are they managing that?
It's all about diversification.
Yeah.
The data shows exports to the U.S. fell almost 29% in November, a huge hit.
But they made it up elsewhere.
Completely. They offset it by boosting exports to Africa by over 27% and to ASEAN by more than 8%. They're just finding new markets fast.
And it's not just about volume. The brief talks about China Shock 2.0. The first one was cheap manufactured goods. What's different this time?
This time it's all concentrated in high value-added sectors, specifically green transition exports, EVs, solar panels, batteries.
So they're directly competing with developed economies.
Acutely, especially Europe and Japan. Suddenly, their high-tech manufacturing base is up against heavily subsidized Chinese alternatives.
But there's a paradox here, isn't there? The brief notes that investment contributed less than 1% to GDP growth in 2025.
It's a huge weakness. It shows the limits of their traditional investment-heavy model. The new 5-year plan is doubling down on manufacturing market share, not on boosting their own sluggish domestic consumption.
They're essentially exporting their overcapacity problem.
That's exactly it. Prioritizing stability for their big state-owned companies over real growth for their own people.
Meanwhile, India seems to be the big winner in all this realignment.
Arguably the primary beneficiary. The brief shows them successfully maintaining a multi-aligned foreign policy, and they're seeing robust growth, around 6.5%.
How are they pulling that off?
It's a masterclass in diplomacy. They're deepening defense ties with the Quad, the U.S., Japan, France. At the same time, they're preserving essential energy imports from Russia. They're leveraging their non-aligned history to their absolute advantage.
And positioning themselves as the democratic leader of the global South.
Which is a direct contrast to China's more extractive Belt and Road Initiative. India holds this unique pivot position, able to get concessions from both emerging spheres without committing fully to either.
Okay, let's shift to active conflicts. Ukraine. The brief describes the situation as of mid-December 2025 as being in strategic flux.
Right. Russia occupies about 19.2% of Ukrainian territory. That's roughly the size of Ohio. And they did gain about 215 square miles in the 4 weeks leading up to the report.
So those numbers suggest a slow, grinding Russian advance. But what's the tactical reality on the ground?
It's full of contradictions. The brief notes that Ukraine actually retook control of almost all of Kupiansk, which is a key rail hub. And the city of Pokrovsk is still fiercely contested, despite Russian claims.
And the human cost.
Staggering. By December 1st, Russian courts had received almost 90,000 claims from families trying to declare servicemen dead or missing. That gives you a sense of the real casualties.
And while the front lines move slowly, the infrastructure war is relentless.
Russian strikes have pushed Ukraine's power grid to the brink. People in Kiev are facing up to 16 hours a day without power. It's a clear strategy to break civilian morale in winter.
And all of that is driving the diplomatic calculus in Washington.
For sure. The brief says senior Trump administration officials assess that Ukraine is losing, which is intensifying the pressure for negotiations.
We're hearing that envoys are meeting with Russian delegations claiming a deal is really, really close.
They are.
So what's Ukraine's bottom line? What do they need to even consider a deal?
President Zelensky has been clear. He's open to compromising on NATO membership, but only if he gets bilateral security guarantees that are similar to NATO's Article 5 first.
A guarantee of defense from key partners.
Without that, a compromise is highly unlikely.
Let's pull the lens back to the Americas again. The brief talks about a new extractivism paradox.
Yes, this is a classic conflict of needs. You have the critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, that the world needs for the green transition.
But extracting them
Conflicts acutely with rainforest preservation in places like Brazil, which just hosted their COP30 climate summit. You need the minerals to fight climate change, but getting them destroys vital ecosystems.
And this brings up Africa, which holds so many of these resources, but according to the brief, faces institutional neglect in the new U.S. strategy.
It does. The mineral wars for cobalt and lithium have intensified, and local governments are demanding what's called higher value addition.
Value addition, what does that mean in practical terms?
It means they're demanding that foreign companies process the raw ore locally, turn it to battery materials, for instance, rather than just exporting raw dirt. They want the jobs and the industrial base.
And that's creating friction with G7 mining interests.
Huge friction. And the Sudan example in the brief really shows where U.S. priorities lie.
How so?
The U.S. publicly called out countries supplying the RSF, the militia, widely accused of war crimes, with the UAE often named. But Washington took no concrete action. It shows the prioritization of partnerships with the Gulf over humanitarian concerns in Africa. It's a consistent theme.
Okay, let's pivot to the tech frontier, AI. The brief says 2025 was the year we transitioned from generative AI to agentic AI.
Right. So generative AI is what writes an essay or makes a picture for you.
And agentic AI
is a system that can execute complex workflows autonomously. It doesn't just write the script. It can schedule the meetings, do the research, write the code, and make business decisions, all on its own after you give it a goal.
The hype around this is everywhere. 99% of developers are exploring AI agents. Gartner is predicting 15% of work decisions could be done by agents by 2028. There has to be a catch.
There's a huge reality gap. The brief says only about 6% of organizations are actually AI high performers, seeing real value from this.
So what's the bottleneck?
It's not the AI's intelligence, it's the plumbing. The biggest roadblock is just exposing existing enterprise APIs, the interfaces that let the AI actually connect to and use a company's existing software.
So the intelligence is there, but the legacy IT systems can't handle it.
Precisely. And these systems need massive compute and energy. Culturally, it's also forcing a huge shift in what skills are valuable.
What do you mean?
The advantage is moving from problem solving to knowledge synthesis.
Okay.
If the AI can solve most standard problems, the real human value comes from framing the right questions, synthesizing all the information, and critically evaluating the AI's output. The computer does the homework. The human decides what to study.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we move on, we have to talk about this encryption cliff, the quantum threat.
Yes, the harvest now, decrypt later threat.
So adversaries are just grabbing all our encrypted data now.
Exactly. They're stockpiling it, knowing that once they have a powerful enough quantum computer, they can break the encryption on all of it instantly. It's a ticking time bomb for decades of secrets.
The fix exists, though. The post-quantum cryptography standards were finalized in 2024.
They were. But implementation is still in the very early stages, and that's why it's a cliff. AI-accelerated hacking is making us more vulnerable now, and quantum decryption is coming later. The threat is compounded.
So if we pull all these threads together, U.S. policy, Europe rearming, China's economy, this tech acceleration, what does the brief project for 2026?
It predicts a geostrategic crystallization into what it calls a two-sphere world.
A two-sphere world. So not quite a new Cold War.
Not exactly, but a fractured global system. One sphere is U.S.-led, built on security and bilateral alliances. The other is coalescing around China, built on infrastructure, alternative finance, and global South solidarity.
And the big question for you, the listener, is what kind of world that will be.
Right. Will the boundary between these spheres be permeable, allowing for stable trade, or will it be rigid, leading to a catastrophic fragmentation of global supply chains?
And economically, the outlook is not great. The brief warns of a stagflationary ripple in early 2026.
That's the delayed impact of all of 2025's tariffs finally hitting consumer prices. You get elevated inflation, which stops central banks from cutting rates, combined with slowing growth. That's stagflation.
And what's the government response to that?
A big shift toward state capitalism. Governments across the G7 will move to protect strategic domestic industries, semiconductors, batteries, defense.
Justified by national security.
But it risks a wasteful subsidy race and only adds to the global friction.
Finally, what are the most immediate conflict risks on the radar?
Well, beyond Ukraine, the brief highlights the maturity of the drone-based insurgency in Latin America. The major cartels are now using sophisticated commercial drone tech. These are coordinated air threats that local security forces are just not equipped to handle.
And the ultimate wild card.
An unexpected AI capability surprise. A sudden leap in, say, mathematical reasoning that renders our current governance frameworks obsolete overnight. It's not about killer robots. It's about a new energy source or material being discovered instantly, upending the entire global balance of power.
An incredible and frankly sobering deep dive. So we've covered the U.S. shift to hard sovereignty, Europe's unprecedented 5% defense commitment, China's export diversification, and this collision between the promise of agentic AI and the quantum security cliff.
And if you look at all of it together, the source suggests we're in an age of strategic scarcity, a scarcity of trust, of resources, of shared global purpose. The implication is that we have to abandon the old ambition of a comprehensive international order.
And instead focus on building minimal viable frameworks for coexistence.
Exactly.
So here's the final thought for you to mull over. Considering the need for alliance coherence in the U.S.-Europe sphere on one hand, and the need for multi-alignment in the global south on the other, which single choice made in 2026, whether it's about tech governance, alliance commitments, or resource extraction, will have the largest impact on whether this two-sphere world becomes a stable equilibrium or just another unstable, chaotic transition.
The path isn't set. The choices made in the next year, often small technical or economic choices, will be the ones that shape that future.
Use this synthesized knowledge as your guide. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.